Hey, I'm Buck August, registered dietitian with Inlow Medical Center, and today we're going to be talking about sodium. We'll talk about the recommendations for sodium, what foods are high in sodium, and how you can decrease your sodium intake. So why do we care about sodium? Why would we want to lower our sodium intake? Mostly it's related to blood pressure. Higher sodium intake has a tendency to raise blood pressure. It can also help to reduce, lowering our intake can help to reduce the risk for heart disease and stroke. Sodium is actually very important in our body. It's what we call an electrolyte. It helps to keep fluids where they're supposed to be. It's involved with how our muscles and our nerves function. And it can also help with the absorption of nutrients. So we do need sodium. We have to have sodium to survive. Our body depends on sodium. It's just that most of us have a tendency to take in a lot more sodium than what we really need. About a third of Americans actually have a blood pressure that's considered to be too high, and almost 70% of Americans are what they call salt sensitive. So those of us, when we increase our sodium intake, our blood pressure has a tendency to go up. So any guesses on the average sodium intake in America? It's about 3,400 milligrams a day, and that's quite a bit higher than what's recommended. So generally, for the general population, they recommend no more than about 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day. And then when we already have a issue with our heart, oftentimes the doctors will recommend a lower sodium intake, maybe 2,000 milligrams. They'll call that 2 grams, maybe even 1,500 milligrams. And very rarely I've heard of a sodium limitation all the way down to 1,200 milligrams, but that's normally pretty extreme. So considering the average American's taking in about 3,400 milligrams, that's, 2-3 times what your doctor may recommend for you. And to give you an idea, 2,400 milligrams of sodium is a teaspoon. So if you take a measuring spoon, so about the size of your pinky, that much table salt is 2,400 milligrams. So it can add up really quickly. Where do we find a lot of sodium in our diet? Well, it's in processed foods by and far. So anything that comes in a box or a can is going to have a lot more sodium. If you buy fresh fruits and vegetables, meats, grains, things like that, they have a little bit of sodium naturally, but nothing compared to the processed foods. They say about 75% of the average person's sodium intake actually comes from those processed foods as opposed to, our whole foods, the fruits and vegetables. Chips, deli meats, those are also really high in sodium, where a lot of people get sodium. And then also when you go to a restaurant, whether that's a regular restaurant or a fast food restaurant, they tend to have a lot more salt in those foods just because that's how they prepare it. Or possibly, like in the case of fast food, they may receive a lot of their products frozen or canned, pre-prepared, and they probably put a lot of sodium in them already before they even get to the restaurant and are cooked. So how can we decrease sodium in our diet? You can use salt-free seasonings. So Mrs. Dash is a classic example. There used to just be regular Mrs. Dash. Now there's a bunch of different versions. I think some of the other versions taste better than the classic Mrs. Dash, but some people still like that one. Also, things like Lowry's and different seasoning makers that normally have like a seasoned salt will have a low or no sodium version. And then most stores actually have a no or low sodium version of a seasoning blend that has different herbs and spices. So for instance, Trader Joe's has one that's called 21 Seasoned Salute. Safeway, they have their own salt-free seasoning blend. So if you look in the spice section at the grocery store, normally you'll be able to find something that's a low or no sodium seasoning blend that you can use on a variety of foods. When it comes to processed foods, you want to be really careful, like we were talking about with the box or canned or frozen meals. Those tend to have a whole lot of sodium, maybe a quarter, a half, or even a whole day's worth of sodium in one meal, what we would normally consider to be one serving. If you're a big fan of soup, you can find low or no sodium soups. Oftentimes the taste people say is lacking. So you can make your own soup if you got, let's say, if you're going to make a chicken soup. So if you got the whole chicken, you boiled it, made your stock, added your vegetables, add some different herbs and spices, you can get a good tasting soup without all the salt in there. You can also get low sodium or no sodium broth. So you can start with that. They have the powders or they have like the jarred ones. And you can start with that to give it some flavor without all the salt and then add more to it. Pretty much all canned foods you can find a low or no sodium version of. So if that was like canned beans or vegetables, if you look there at the store, there's pretty much always going to be a low salt or no salt version. If you do have canned food on hand still, let's say a can of beans that was the regular one with all the salt in there, if you take that can and pour it into your colander, your pasta drainer, and rinse it off, it takes off almost half the salt. So you can really decrease the sodium amount that's in there. You could do the same with like canned corn or canned peas. If you like chips or crackers, you can find low sodium versions of most of those things. Those aren't foods that we want to eat a lot of necessarily, but if you are going to eat them, you can find a lower sodium version. If you, let's say you really like occasionally to have ramen or mac and cheese, you can use less of the seasoning packet that comes in there, because most of the sodium is going to be in the seasoning packet as opposed to in the noodles themselves. With dairy products, milk isn't too high in sodium. Cheese has some. Cottage cheese has a lot of salt though. So I have a lot of people who like to eat cottage cheese, and it's important to take note that there's a lot of sodium in there. On the flip side of sodium is potassium. So potassium can actually help to ameliorate some of the issues that come from sodium. And we want to have a balance of these. We actually want more potassium than we do of sodium. We want about 4,700 milligrams of potassium. And we get potassium from fruits and vegetables. So when we eat more fruits and vegetables, less of the salt, that can really help with our blood pressure. To give you an idea of some potassium-rich foods, the classic example are bananas. A lot of people think about potassium in bananas, but also avocado is great. Potatoes actually have a lot of potassium, and sweet potatoes, Swiss chard, so those deep green leafy vegetables that are good for us, watermelon, and some beans. So speaking of increasing the fruits and vegetables and decreasing the salt, there's a diet that's called the DASH diet, which is a dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This diet encourages a lot of produce, so a lot of fruits and vegetables, a low sodium intake, and a few other things. And they've studied this and found that it really does have a tendency to help to decrease people's blood pressure just with those diet and lifestyle changes. So the DASH diet consists of about 6 to 8 servings of whole grains. So let's say in the morning you have a cup of oatmeal, at lunch you have a sandwich on whole grain bread, 2 pieces of whole grain bread. At dinner, maybe we had a cup of whole wheat pasta. That's 6 servings of whole grains. 4 to 5 servings of vegetables. A lot of people think that's really challenging to get that many in, and it can be for sure, but it definitely is doable. Let's say at breakfast we had an egg white omelet with spinach, so there's a serving or 2 of vegetables. At lunch, maybe you have a sandwich with some lettuce and tomato and then some carrots on the side, so there's maybe another couple servings. At dinner, if you have a big salad, you can easily get a few servings of veggies, or a big serving of cooked vegetables. You can easily get a couple servings there. They also recommend 4 or 5 servings of fruit. So kind of the same deal. Feels like a lot, but let's say at breakfast, you had that oatmeal, we put some raisins in there. That was a serving. At lunch, with our sandwich and carrots, we have a cut up apple. So there's another serving of fruit. Maybe for a snack, we have an orange. At dinner on our big salad, maybe we incorporate some berries, and then we get up to 4 servings of fruit. So you can do it. As the weather gets warmer too, it can be a lot easier to get that produce in. You can make maybe a smoothie where you use a variety of fruits and then maybe throw in some spinach or something. And so you can get a lot of fruits and vegetables in a smoothie. So that can be a good way to go. Back to the DASH diet. They recommend going easy on sweets, easy on fat, so it is kind of a low-fat diet. Definitely encourage some nuts or seeds and beans, which we know are very heart healthy. They have a lot of good nutrients in there. Moderate amount of proteins, and they recommend the leaner proteins. So it kind of balances everything out. Oh, and a little bit of low-fat dairy also. They recommend 2 or 3 servings in a day. Overall, very healthy diet, a really healthy way to go about eating, and it's been shown to really help with lowering blood pressure, which is important. To give you an idea of some of the serving sizes on those food groups, we're talking about the fruits and vegetables. Generally speaking, a half a cup is a serving for fruits or vegetables, half a cup of cooked vegetables, or a cup of like salad, the leafy greens. For fruits, a half a cup or a quarter cup or so of a dried fruit. For proteins, servings are in ounces, so a 3-ounce piece of meat is 3 ounces, 3 servings. Grains, it depends. A slice of bread is typically considered 1 serving. A half a cup of cooked pasta is considered a serving, or a half a cup of brown rice or quinoa. For dairy, a cup of milk is a serving. Yogurt kind of varies. It's about a cup. Oftentimes they'll have them in those little containers that are a little smaller. And then cheese is about 1.5 ounces. And then fats, it's about a teaspoon or a tablespoon of like a dressing that's oil and vinegar. The DASH diet is a really healthy way to help to lower your blood pressure. And in general, watching our sodium intake can lower blood pressure. The DASH diet just takes it a step further by increasing the fruits and vegetables, increasing the potassium. Good take-home point for all of this is being sure to eat a wide variety of produce, so fruits and vegetables, choose some whole grains, nuts and beans, bit of lean proteins, easy on the salt and the processed foods. And that'll go a long way to help to keep you healthy.